James Barnes was born on March 10, 1917, in New York City to George and Winifred Barnes. He was the oldest of 4 children. Growing up, Barnes was a high achiever, excelling in both sports and school. When he was young, he met Steve Rogers after some bullies tried to steal his money. From then on, they became best friends, and Barnes often stood up for Rogers, who was smaller and an easy target for bullies. One time, after a trip to Rockaway Beach, Barnes and Rogers had to hitch a ride back to Brooklyn on a freezer truck because they had spent all their train money on hot dogs. Barnes had also accidentally spent $3 trying to win a stuffed bear for a girl named Dolores. On another occasion, Barnes talked Rogers into riding the cyclone at Coney Island, which made Rogers sick and caused Barnes to laugh a lot. In 1936, Steve Rogers' mother passed away from tuberculosis and was buried next to her husband. After the funeral, Barnes walked Rogers home and offered him a place to stay with his family in exchange for doing some chores. However, Rogers turned down the offer, saying he could manage on his own. When Rogers struggled to find his house keys, Barnes pulled out a hidden key and reminded him that he didn't have to face things alone because he would be there for him to the end of the line, a promise Rogers would never forget. In 1937, Barnes read The Hobbit when it was first published. In December 1941, while in art class, Barnes and Rogers heard that the United States had entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. That same day, they went to a U.S. Army recruitment center in New York City. Rogers was classified as 4F and rejected from service, but Barnes was accepted into the Army. He earned the rank of sergeant and trained as a sniper. Barnes, along with the rest of the 107th Infantry Regiment, trained during the winter at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The day before Barnes was set to ship out to England, he found Steve Rogers getting beaten up by a bully. Barnes stepped in to defend his friend, quickly sending the bully running with a punch to the jaw and a kick. He then found out that Rogers had been trying to enlist in the Army again, using fake documents so he could fight in World War II. Barnes told Rogers that he had received his orders and would be heading to war the next morning. Rogers seemed upset that he wasn't going with them, but Barnes, determined to lift his friend's spirits, joked that Rogers would be the last eligible bachelor left in New York City. Barnes and Rogers attended the Stark Expo together, as Barnes wanted to make the most of his last day in the city before leaving for war. What Barnes didn't mention to Rogers was that it was actually a double date with 2 girls, Connie and Bonnie, who were thrilled to spend the evening with a handsome soldier like Sergeant Barnes. When Rogers asked what Barnes had told the girls about him, Barnes casually replied, "Only the good stuff," as he greeted the girls. While happily exploring the expo together, the group of 4 checked out the latest inventions showcased by Stark Industries. They watched as Howard Stark himself demonstrated a hover car, which impressed Barnes until it malfunctioned and crashed to the ground, though Stark joked that it was just a prototype. When Barnes turned around to suggest they go out dancing, he noticed that Rogers had slipped away from the group to try enlisting in the Army once again, despite Barnes' previous objections. Barnes soon found Rogers trying to enlist again and first tried to convince him to come back and rejoin the double date. When that didn't work, Barnes reminded him that this wasn't a back alley fight, but a real war. Despite Barnes' objections, Rogers went ahead with his plan, but not before sharing a heartfelt goodbye. Rogers joked, telling Barnes not to win the war before he could join. Barnes then left with the 2 girls, and the next day, he and his unit shipped out to England. While serving on the front lines during World War II, Barnes and his unit, which included Dum Dum Dugan and Gabe Jones, were ambushed by Wehrmacht troops at Azzano on the Italian front. Despite being outgunned and without reinforcements, the battle took an unexpected turn when another German unit arrived with an incredibly powerful tank. The tank easily wiped out the remaining Nazis who had tried to escape. As Barnes, Dugan, and Jones emerged from their hiding spot to survey the battlefield, the tank turned its weapons on them, and they were quickly captured by Hydra. Once taken prisoner, Barnes and the others were sent to a weapons facility in Austria, where they were forced to help build new weapons for Hydra's forces. In October 1943, Barnes met other Allied prisoners of war, including Jacques Dernier and James Montgomery Falsworth. During his time in captivity, he was brutally beaten by Lomer, but the other prisoners arranged an accident that led to Lomer's death. Barnes and his fellow prisoners worked on parts for the Valkyrie project. When Barnes became too weak to continue working, he was taken to be a test subject for Arnim Zola's super soldier experiments and was injected with Zola's version of the super soldier serum. In November 1943, Steve Rogers, who had gained enhanced strength through an experiment, infiltrated the facility. As Rogers navigated the base, he freed the prisoners, including Barnes, whom he found while pursuing Arnim Zola. Barnes, surprised and confused by Rogers' new, more powerful physique, remarked that he remembered Rogers being much shorter as his friend helped him escape. As the liberated POWs, led by Dum Dum Dugan, fought against the Hydra forces, Rogers and Barnes found themselves trapped inside the base as it began to self-destruct. During their escape, they encountered Johann Schmidt, who taunted Rogers about his transformation, which was the result of Abraham Erskine's experiment. After a brief skirmish, Rogers and Schmidt became separated, with Schmidt revealing his true, monstrous appearance, caused by using an early version of the super soldier serum. Schmidt ridiculed Rogers for thinking he was still just an ordinary soldier, despite being part of a superior class of humanity, before fleeing the collapsing base. With Schmidt gone, Rogers and Barnes turned their attention back to finding a way out. Rogers suggested they climb up and decided to use a support beam to reach a safer part of the base. Because of Barnes' poor health, Rogers insisted that Barnes go first. However, just as Barnes made it to the other side, the beam collapsed beneath him, leaving Rogers trapped on the other side of the exploding base. Rogers told Barnes to escape before the base exploded and killed them both, but Barnes refused, saying he wouldn't leave Rogers behind. He believed they could find another way across. Barnes watched in awe as Rogers used his strength to bend a steel bar and then jumped across the gap to join him. Together, they escaped just moments before the entire base was destroyed. Barnes and Steve Rogers eventually joined up with the other freed prisoners of war, and together they walked 30 miles back to the American base in Italy. When they arrived, bringing along the weapons and vehicles they had taken from Hydra, they were warmly welcomed by the other soldiers, who were amazed that Rogers had managed to succeed in rescuing the missing men. While Barnes and Dum Dum Dugan were reconnecting with their fellow soldiers, Rogers offered to turn himself in for a court-martial. However, Phillips decided not to punish him, despite Rogers going against his strict orders during the rescue mission. As the whole unit gathered, Rogers was reunited with Peggy Carter, who playfully teased him for being late since he hadn't been able to let her know about the mission's success. Barnes then led the soldiers in cheering for Rogers as their hero. The freed prisoners received medical care and were given some time away from the battlefield to recover. Following their escape from the Hydra prison, Barnes and all the other former prisoners of war, including Dum Dum Dugan, were given a break from duty in London. Steve Rogers later joined them inside of the Whip and Fiddle pub and convinced them to join his crusade against the Nazis and Hydra, forming a group of fighters known as the Howling Commandos. Barnes told Rogers that he wouldn't follow Captain America, but he would always follow his friend. When Peggy Carter, dressed up, came to the pub to tell Rogers about an upcoming meeting with Chester Phillips and Howard Stark, Barnes had to face the fact that Rogers was now the one who attracted attention from women, not him. Rogers playfully teased Barnes, joking that Carter might have a friend for him, before they talked about whether Rogers would keep wearing the Captain America uniform. Having agreed to return to the battlefield, Barnes, alongside the newly formed Howling Commandos, joined Rogers back into the front lines of World War II. Over the following year of the war, Barnes and the rest of the commandos progressively destroyed most major Hydra operations and key science facilities, preventing Johann Schmidt and Arnim Zola from completing more projects designed to progress their world-dominating plans. Barnes followed the team while they focused on destroying Hydra's army units, tanks, and other facilities, ensuring that Hydra's strength was greatly reduced while the United States Army, as well as the Strategic Scientific Reserve, continued moving forward against them. Barnes would often work like the sniper of the group, protecting his team of commandos, standing by while Jacques Dernier planted bombs on the Hydra tanks to successfully destroy them. In early 1945, Barnes, Captain America, and the Howling Commandos prepared for a mission to board the Schnellzug EB-912 train, which was carrying Arnim Zola. Their goal was to capture Zola and learn more about the Red Skull's plans. As they looked down at the snowy mountain they needed to cross, Barnes joked that this mission was Rogers' way of getting back at him for making Rogers ride a roller coaster that made him sick. Rogers just smiled and didn't confirm or deny it. When Jim Morita picked up a radio signal from Hydra confirming that Zola was on the train, Barnes, Rogers, and Gabe Jones used a zip line to get on board as the train moved through the mountains. While Jones stayed on the roof of the train, Barnes and Rogers went inside to explore the different carriages. However, just moments after they arrived, they were unexpectedly separated and attacked by a group of armored Hydra soldiers sent by Zola to kill them. While Rogers was forced to fight the heavily armed Hydra guard, Barnes became pinned down by 3 soldiers. Although he was able to kill 2, Barnes soon ran out of ammunition and feared he would soon be killed. Rogers, however, was able to open up the door and throw him a new gun which he used to kill the last remaining soldier when Rogers distracted him. Barnes claimed that he had him on the ropes and Rogers assured him that he still believed him. Just as the two began to relax, another Hydra soldier appeared behind them and shot at them with an Arnim Halation 99L assault weapon, blowing a hole in the side of the train and knocking Rogers off his feet. Barnes grabbed Captain America's shield and fired at the soldier, but he was shot again. The force of the blast sent him off the train, and he found himself hanging onto a damaged rail for dear life as the train sped through the mountains. Rogers took out the soldier by throwing his shield at him and then focused on rescuing Barnes, who was hanging off a rail on the side of the train. Rogers pleaded with Barnes to hold on as he moved closer to him and tried to grab his hand. But just before they could reach each other, the rail broke and Barnes fell into the icy Danube River below. Rogers could only watch in horror as it seemed like Barnes had fallen to his death. Due to his enhanced physiology granted to him by the super soldier serum, Barnes was just able to survive the fall from the train, though his left arm was ripped from his body upon impact. His nearly lifeless body was discovered by a Soviet soldier, who dragged him back to a Soviet POW camp, where he remained until Arnim Zola was released from the SSR's custody. As a captive of the new Hydra, which was now working within S.H.I.E.L.D., Barnes became the first subject of the Winter Soldier program. After removing the remains of his severed arm, the doctors replaced it with a prosthetic one. To erase his memories as Barnes and reshape him to their needs, Hydra often used a memory-suppressing machine to perform electroconvulsive therapy, which caused serious damage to the part of Barnes' brain that controlled memory and decision-making. With his limbic system badly affected, Barnes lost access to his memories from before the experiments and became very aware of his surroundings, making him highly responsive to commands. With his body reaching the highest level of physical perfection and his arm equipped with advanced weapon technology, Barnes was used as Hydra's personal weapon for many years. They kept him frozen in suspended animation between missions to stop him from aging and to manage the healing effects of his serum. After each mission, Hydra painfully erased his memories to ensure he stayed emotionless and forgot about the people he had killed. After receiving extensive training from both Hydra and the Soviet Union, along with being a super soldier, Barnes became a skilled fighter and a ruthless killer. His time as a Soviet super soldier earned him the nickname Winter Soldier. He would often be kept frozen for long periods until Hydra decided to wake him up for missions. In 1951, the Winter Soldier was unfrozen and sent to help the Soviet forces during the Korean War, where he faced an American super soldier named Isaiah Bradley. Despite his efforts, Winter Soldier couldn't kill Bradley, who almost destroyed his metal arm, but they both survived the fight. Over the next 50 years, Winter Soldier carried out many assassinations, targeting various individuals, including scientists and political leaders, such as John F. Kennedy in 1963. Because of his skills and mysterious nature, Winter Soldier became a ghost story among intelligence circles, with many doubting that he even existed. While in the cryostasis chamber, Winter Soldier was held in the Hydra Siberian facility. On December 16, 1991, he was defrosted by Vasily Karpov, who, once his memories had been wiped yet again by the memory-suppressing machine, ensured Barnes was loyal to Hydra by using key words to reinforce his conditioning. With his mind programmed, Karpov told Barnes that they needed him to steal a supply of the super soldier serum from Howard Stark's car and to assassinate Stark and his wife, Maria, in the process. The Winter Soldier traveled to Long Island in New York and waited for Stark to leave his home. Once Stark was on the road, Winter Soldier chased him on his motorbike and shot at the car, causing it to swerve off the road and crash into a nearby tree. Ignoring the injured victims for a moment, Winter Soldier first made sure to grab the super soldier serum before turning his focus to Stark, who had survived and was crawling away from the wreckage in an attempt to escape. As the badly injured Stark crawled away from the wreck and begged to save his wife's life, Winter Soldier ignored his pleas and grabbed him with his metal arm. When Stark looked up at his attacker, he recognized him from their time together in World War II and called him Sergeant Barnes. However, Winter Soldier didn't seem to recognize the name and proceeded to hit Stark in the face with his metal arm, cracking his skull and killing him. With Stark now dead, Winter Soldier carried his body and placed it back inside the car before moving on to strangle Stark's wife to death. With both his targets now dead, Barnes destroyed the CCTV camera, thereby making it seem like the Starks had died in a car accident. Returning to the Hydra Siberian facility, he delivered the serum to Karpov, who complimented him on his success. The serum was then used to create multiple Winter Soldiers, who were prepared for missions. As Hydra decided they needed more enhanced assassins, members of a Hydra death squad were injected with the super soldier serum that Winter Soldier had stolen from Howard Stark for the Winter Soldier program. To make sure the other Winter Soldiers were ready for battle, Winter Soldier was given the job of training them. If any of them could overpower and subdue him, they would be accepted into the program. During one of these training sessions at the Hydra facility in Siberia, Winter Soldier was defeated. Vasily Karpov congratulated Joseph, while a doctor came to check on his health. However, Joseph, full of adrenaline, suddenly attacked the doctor, slamming his face into the ground and killing him. This led to a riot, with the other Winter Soldiers rising up against their masters and attacking Karpov and the guards. As a fight broke out, the scared Karpov ordered Winter Soldier to protect him. He took Karpov away from the danger and locked the other soldiers in a cage. While the Hydra guards eventually managed to subdue the other soldiers and put them back into cryostasis chambers, Karpov decided that they should all be kept frozen until they could be controlled. After Karpov escaped to the United States, the facility was abandoned following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Still under Hydra's control, Winter Soldier went to take out another target at the Hotel Inessa, where his target was protected by a team of bodyguards. Winter Soldier started his attack by punching his metal arm through a wall, grabbing one guard and quickly taking him down. He then threw a blade at the next guard and shot the following two before they even knew what was happening. As his target tried to escape, Winter Soldier jumped off the balcony to cut him off. The fight was over quickly as the target tried to run, but Winter Soldier quickly took out his personal protection unit. In just a few seconds, he shot and impaled the target's two closest guards with his knives. With his target now defenseless, Winter Soldier grabbed him by the neck and said, "Hail Hydra," before using his prosthetic arm to crush his throat and then dropping the corpse to the floor. However, once his target had been executed, Winter Soldier then noticed R.J. Nakajima, who had been attempting to enter his hotel room and inadvertently witnessed the massacre, and was too afraid to be able to get his door unlocked and escape. As Winter Soldier approached Nakajima, he was told that Nakajima had seen nothing, although still the ruthless super soldier shot Nakajima in the head before escaping. In 2009, Winter Soldier was sent to kill a nuclear scientist who was being protected by Black Widow. Without thinking twice, he attacked and sent the car with the scientist and Black Widow over a cliff. When he saw that Black Widow had saved the scientist from falling to his death, Winter Soldier shot her in the stomach, and the bullet hit the scientist, killing him. With his mission completed, Winter Soldier escaped without being chased. In 2014, Alexander Pierce activated Winter Soldier again to assassinate director Nick Fury, who had just started uncovering Hydra's secret existence by questioning Project Insight. After Fury managed to survive an attack by over a dozen Hydra agents in Washington, D.C., Winter Soldier got ahead of Fury's SUV and used a disc grenade to disable it, causing the car to flip over. He then easily stepped away from the burning wreckage. However, as Winter Soldier approached the vehicle to finish off Fury, he discovered that Fury had used a mouse hole to escape from the wreckage and flee into the sewers. Not willing to let his target get away, Winter Soldier later found Fury at Steve Rogers' apartment, where Fury was trying to share important information about the attack and possible infiltration in S.H.I.E.L.D. Before Fury could say anything else, Winter Soldier shot him in the back multiple times, with the bullets piercing straight through his bulletproof vest and going through the apartment wall from a building across the street. With Fury apparently dead, Winter Soldier made his escape, but Rogers chased after him, trying to stop him by throwing his shield. However, Winter Soldier paused and caught the shield with his bionic arm, then threw it back with great force after glancing at Rogers for a moment. As Rogers stood in shock at the assassin's strength and quick reflexes, Winter Soldier escaped before Rogers could figure out where he had gone. Instead of being put back in his cryostasis chamber, Winter Soldier was sent to Alexander Pierce's house for his next orders after Nick Fury's apparent death. Winter Soldier waited silently in the darkness until Pierce came back. When he saw Winter Soldier, Pierce joked about offering him some milk, but Winter Soldier stayed quiet as Pierce explained that their timeline had changed. He was then told that his next targets were Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff, who had uncovered Arnim Zola and caused its destruction. They were now trying to expose Hydra's Project Insight plan, which aimed to kill 20 million people across the United States using the helicarriers. When they were discovered by Renata, Winter Soldier watched as Pierce shot and killed her to keep their secret safe. The next day, Winter Soldier tracked down all his targets and attacked them on the freeway while they were trying to kidnap Jasper Sidwell. He landed on the roof of their car, threw Sidwell into the path of an oncoming truck, and fired inside the car to try to kill his targets. However, before he could get a confirmed kill, Sam Wilson hit the brakes, causing Winter Soldier to be thrown off the car's roof. Using his prosthetic arm to stop himself, Winter Soldier moved out of the way as the car rushed toward him and then ripped out the steering wheel. This caused the car to lose control and crash, while Steve Rogers managed to get all his allies to safety. Seeing that they had survived, Barnes fired a grenade at his targets. Rogers blocked the explosion with his shield and was sent flying off the bridge, crashing into a bus below. Winter Soldier then focused on Natasha Romanoff, and he and his Hydra team fired at her until an explosion from Barnes' grenade caused her to fall from the bridge. She barely managed to save herself using a grappling hook gun. With his targets off the bridge and in a tough spot, Winter Soldier grabbed his machine gun and aimed to finish them off. However, Black Widow shot him in the eye, and he survived only because of his protective mask. Angry at being shot at, Winter Soldier fired down at Romanoff but barely missed all his shots as she ran for her life down the street. Instead of focusing on her, Winter Soldier told his men to handle Rogers while he went after her himself. Jumping off the bridge, Winter Soldier landed on a car and chased the S.H.I.E.L.D. spy through the streets of Washington, D.C., as civilians ran for cover and his agents shot at both Rogers and Wilson. While reloading his grenade launcher, Winter Soldier thought he had Romanoff trapped when he heard her voice coming from behind a parked car. Trying to kill her, he quietly dropped a ball grenade and let it roll toward the sound. However, he soon realized it was a trick. Romanoff had left her phone playing her voice to distract him while she snuck up behind him for a surprise attack. Once Winter Soldier was distracted, Romanoff jumped onto his shoulder and tried to choke him with her garrote. In a tough fight, he eventually threw her off by slamming her onto a nearby car. However, one of her taser discs temporarily disabled his prosthetic arm, giving Romanoff a chance to escape into the crowd while he reactivated his arm. With his arm working again, Winter Soldier chased after Romanoff, who was trying to help innocent people while running for her life. Spotting his target, Barnes aimed and fired, hitting Romanoff in the shoulder and making her fall. Once he had her trapped on the street, Winter Soldier charged forward, leaping onto a car as he got ready to finish her off. Just before Winter Soldier could kill Black Widow, Captain America rushed in to help his allies. When Winter Soldier saw him coming, he turned around and tried to hit him with his metal arm, but Captain America blocked the attack with his shield. As Winter Soldier kicked him down to the ground, the two began a fierce one-on-one fight, matching each other blow for blow. Determined to kill his target, Winter Soldier fired all the bullets from his machine gun at Rogers, but they were all blocked by the shield. Frustrated, Winter Soldier used his other weapons, which were mostly low on ammo, and eventually had to toss them aside to keep fighting. After losing all his guns during the fight, Winter Soldier briefly grabbed Captain America's shield and then pushed Rogers back with a strong punch to the chest. As Rogers charged at him, Winter Soldier threw the shield with great force, but it missed and got stuck in a nearby van. As the intense fight between Winter Soldier and Rogers went on in the streets of Washington, D.C., Winter Soldier used his knife, trying to stab Rogers in the throat while slashing wildly at him. However, since both were very skilled fighters, Winter Soldier couldn't land a fatal hit and soon lost his weapon. Rogers was able to throw Winter Soldier across the street and into a nearby car before hitting him hard again. The two fighters had to go back to fighting with their hands as Winter Soldier struck Rogers, avoiding being thrown to the ground. He used his metal arm to try to strangle Rogers before throwing him across a car. When Rogers was briefly on the ground and defenseless, Winter Soldier tried to finish him off with a strong punch from his metal arm, but he missed and hit the concrete instead as Rogers dodged. Furious that he still hadn't killed his target as Alexander Pierce had ordered, Winter Soldier attacked Captain America with his metal arm, pushing him back into a nearby van before pulling out his second knife. Using his bionic arm for extra strength, Winter Soldier stabbed the knife into the van, cutting through the metal, but Captain America managed to dodge the blade and then threw Winter Soldier off him. Rogers was able to reclaim his shield as he blocked all of Winter Soldier's continued strikes with his knife before he was able to dodge one blow and embedded his shield in Winter Soldier's arm, causing serious damage. In the midst of the fight, Rogers ripped the Winter Soldier's mask off his face and stared in disbelief as Barnes turned and revealed his true face. Having recognized him as James "Bucky" Barnes, Rogers brought Winter Soldier to a standstill. While Winter Soldier briefly wondered who Barnes was, he quickly remembered his mission and raised his gun to shoot Captain America and complete his task for Hydra. Just before he could pull the trigger, Falcon swooped in with his EX-07 Falcon and knocked Winter Soldier to the ground. Natasha Romanoff then shot at him with the grenade launcher he had dropped while fighting Rogers. Although Winter Soldier dodged the explosion, he still had to escape the streets as Brock Rumlow and the strike agents rushed in to capture the fugitives. Rejoining Hydra, Winter Soldier was taken back to the Ideal Federal Savings Bank, where he began to act erratically and violently toward the doctors. While they were fixing his robotic arm, Barnes started to remember bits of his past. These memories included his fall from the train during World War II and the surgeries done on him by Arnim Zola, which made him furious and led him to attack one of the doctors. As Winter Soldier struggled to control his increasing anger, Alexander Pierce arrived at the base to get Barnes' mission report. Even though Jack Rollins warned that Winter Soldier was unpredictable, Pierce approached him, but Winter Soldier didn't respond until Pierce slapped him across the face. Barnes then said that he knew Captain America somehow, which made Pierce uneasy since he secretly knew the truth about their connection. Pierce tried to explain that Winter Soldier only remembered Rogers because they had encountered each other recently during the mission to kill Nick Fury, but Barnes kept insisting that he knew Rogers from before. As Brock Rumlow observed, Pierce reminded Barnes that his work for Hydra was a great service to humanity and that he needed to do it once more for Project Insight. Noticing Barnes' continued hesitation, Pierce ordered more mind-altering procedures to ensure Barnes would comply. Right before Hydra could execute Project Insight and eliminate all potential threats to their control using the helicarriers, their plan was disrupted. Captain America and his allies had infiltrated the Triskelion and exposed Hydra's presence, leading to a battle between loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and Hydra's undercover operatives. To stop the resistance, Alexander Pierce activated the Winter Soldier, who arrived and launched an assault on the agents. In the ensuing chaos, Winter Soldier charged into the battle firing grenades at the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in order to keep them from aiding Captain America. Using his superior strength and skills, Winter Soldier easily overpowered the agents, kicking one agent inside the engine of one of the Quinjets while destroying others with grenades. Once Winter Soldier had cleared through the main teams of the agents, he flew a Quinjet towards one of the helicarriers. After boarding the helicarrier, the Winter Soldier ambushed Captain America and Falcon. He shoved Captain America off the helicarrier, trying to send him plummeting to his death over Washington, D.C. Next, he attacked Falcon, ripping him out of the air and tearing off one of the wings of his EX-07 suit. The Winter Soldier then kicked Falcon off the helicarrier, hoping he would fall to his death as well. Noticing that Captain America had survived the fall and remained on the helicarrier, the Winter Soldier rushed ahead to confront him at the target system for their final showdown. Meanwhile, chaos continued at the Triskelion, where Nick Fury and Black Widow had taken Alexander Pierce hostage, and Falcon was locked in a fight with Brock Rumlow. The Winter Soldier focused solely on facing Captain America. Knowing that Captain America planned to reboot the helicarrier's target system to stop Project Insight, the Winter Soldier was ready to do whatever it took to stop him. As they stood facing each other, Captain America pleaded with his old friend to remember him and consider the innocent lives at stake. When the Winter Soldier remained unmoved, Captain America asked him not to force a fight between them. Despite everything Captain America said, the Winter Soldier had still remained silent and ignored all these pleas. Seeing no other choice, Rogers engaged Barnes in combat, launching his shield at his enemy, which the Winter Soldier blocked with his prosthetic arm before he began shooting at Captain America. Having wounded him, the pair fought in a lengthy, violent hand-to-hand battle with Winter Soldier attempting to use his knife to kill Captain America. Winter Soldier then attempted to get possession of the targeting chip, which would allow Maria Hill to take control and stop Project Insight. As the chip became loose, Winter Soldier attempted to stop Captain America from taking it by throwing his shield at him before shooting at him, which Captain America blocked using the shield Winter Soldier had thrown at him. Once he had deflected the thrown shield away from him, Winter Soldier then ran forward with his knife. In close combat with Captain America again, the Winter Soldier succeeded in stabbing him in the shoulder and tried to destroy the targeting chip. Captain America, determined to retrieve the chip, pulled the knife from his shoulder and fought back. He managed to break the Winter Soldier's arm and injure his leg, subduing him, and finally reclaimed the chip from his grasp. The Winter Soldier regained consciousness just as Captain America was about to reach the system override, shooting him several times. Despite the injuries, Captain America successfully swapped the data chips, allowing Hill to have the three helicarriers target each other, even with him still on board. Unable to stop it, Winter Soldier watched as the operatives, including Russo, unintentionally destroyed Project Insight by firing on the helicarriers and bringing them down. As the helicarrier started to break apart in midair from the attacks by the other ships, Winter Soldier got trapped under falling debris. Seeing this, Captain America quickly rushed to help, lifting the debris to free him. While catching his breath, Winter Soldier listened as Captain America reminded him that they knew each other. However, without hesitation, Winter Soldier betrayed him and launched another attack. Captain America, pleading with Barnes to remember their past, reminded him of his name and their lifelong friendship before Hydra captured him and turned him into an assassin. Refusing to fight his friend, Rogers took off his helmet and let his shield fall out of the helicarrier. Despite this, Barnes still ignored his words, relentlessly attacking Rogers with his bionic arm as the helicarrier continued to fall apart around them. Winter Soldier ignored Rogers' pleas and insisted that completing his mission was all that mattered. He kept attacking Rogers until Rogers quoted something Barnes had said over 70 years ago after his mother's funeral. As Barnes started to remember, he hesitated, not wanting to hit Rogers anymore. However, before Winter Soldier could do anything else, the ground beneath them gave way, and Rogers fell into the river below. Barnes then quickly grabbed onto a metal beam, which allowed him to stay on the helicarrier. Realizing that Rogers truly was his friend, Barnes let go of the beam and dove into the water after Rogers and then pulled him ashore, saving his old friend's life. After saving him, Barnes quickly checked to see if Rogers was still breathing. After he discovered he was, he then slowly walked away towards the nearby woods, going on to his mission to discover his true identity. After escaping the wreckage of the Triskelion, Barnes went back to the Ideal Federal Savings Bank, where he found the Hydra scientists. Once he was free from their mind control, he attacked them, but the memories of all the people he had killed stopped him from finishing them off. Later, Barnes visited the Smithsonian Institution and discovered a memorial for his friend, Howling Commando James Barnes, who was believed to have died during World War II. Now free from Hydra, Barnes was on the run from the government. He went to an old safe house in Romania to uncover more about his past. As he learned more about his life with the Howling Commandos, he recorded his memories in a notebook. One day, while walking through Bucharest and buying plums from a street vendor, Barnes noticed a nervous man watching him. Fearing his identity might be exposed, Barnes approached the man, who quickly ran away. Barnes picked up a Journal de Lugoge newspaper the man had left behind and discovered he was being blamed for the bombing of the Vienna International Center in Austria. The attack had killed several people, including King Chaka of Wakanda. Realizing the danger, Barnes decided to gather his belongings and flee. When Barnes returned to his hideout, he found Captain America already waiting for him. Rogers asked if Barnes remembered him, but Barnes claimed he only knew about him from a museum, though Rogers knew he was lying. Barnes insisted he wasn't responsible for the terrorist attacks, saying that wasn't who he was anymore. Rogers then warned him that those who did blame him were on their way and intended to kill him. The reunion was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of GSG-9 agents, who stormed the building from the roof and hallway. Working together, Barnes and Rogers deflected a grenade thrown at them by using Captain America's shield. Barnes then tossed his backpack out the window, where it landed on a nearby rooftop, assuring Rogers that he had no intention of killing anyone. As more agents rushed into the room, Barnes used his prosthetic arm to block the gunfire and grabbed whatever weapons were nearby to take down his attackers, even using a concrete block. Moving into the stairwell where a larger group of GSG-9 agents were closing in, Barnes continued to fight off his assailants, while Rogers followed closely behind, making sure no one was accidentally killed due to Barnes' aggressive fighting style. Leaving Rogers behind, Barnes jumped down several stories, using his prosthetic arm to catch himself before reaching a balcony and leaping onto the rooftop of the next building, grabbing his backpack and continuing to flee. However, as he tried to escape, he was suddenly attacked by Black Panther, who sought revenge for the death of his father in the bombing. Without exchanging any words, Barnes and Black Panther began fighting, with Black Panther using his Panther habit suit to try to kill Barnes. As Black Panther tried to use his claws to cut Barnes' throat, he became distracted as a GSG-9 helicopter began shooting at the pair, only for Panther's vibranium armor to protect him from the bullets. Barnes began to run again, with Black Panther and Rogers running close behind him as they leaped down from the building and onto the street, while Falcon managed to knock the helicopter out of the way of danger to protect them from the guns. Barnes took advantage of his brief lead to run ahead of Black Panther, jumping down onto a busy underground road and weaving through the traffic. With Black Panther and Captain America quickly closing in, Barnes realized he needed to gain more distance. He grabbed a nearby motorbike, using its speed to extend his lead, while Rogers and Black Panther pursued him in a car they had commandeered in an attempt to catch up. Despite his head start, Black Panther managed to catch up with Barnes and attempted to kill him. However, Barnes was just able to use his bionic arm to block Black Panther's attack, grabbing him by the throat and knocking him into the road, while also grinding his hand across the tarmac to keep from falling off his bike, and had still continued to ride away from danger while the still determined GSG-9 agents followed behind in their cars. As Barnes reached the end of the tunnel, he threw ball grenades to blow up the roof, trying to trap his pursuers and make his escape. However, Black Panther gained speed by leaping onto Falcon's back and managed to knock Barnes off his bike. Before Black Panther could kill Barnes, Rogers intervened to protect his friend. The chase ended when War Machine cornered them, and they were all arrested by GSG-9 agents. Black Panther then revealed himself to be King T'Challa of Wakanda. With Barnes now in custody, he was locked in a containment cell with his cybernetic arm tightly fixed down and taken to the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center building in Berlin. From within his cell, Barnes watched as Steve Rogers, Sam Wilson, and T'Challa were greeted by Sharon Carter and the leader of the Joint Counter-Terrorist Center, Everett Ross, before Barnes was taken away to await his questioning. Barnes was later visited by a man pretending to be psychiatrist Theo Broussard, who had been assigned by the UN to evaluate him. In reality, Helmut Zemo had intercepted Broussard at a train station, taken him to a hotel, and killed him to assume his identity. The fake Broussard claimed he only wanted to ask Barnes a few simple questions to help him, but Barnes stayed mostly silent. He did tell the man that he preferred to be called Bucky rather than James, as Broussard questioned him about the horrible things he experienced while with Hydra. Broussard caused a blackout that disabled the security cameras and began saying the trigger words from the Winter Soldier book, which had once belonged to Vasily Karpov, to reactivate Barnes' Winter Soldier programming. Desperate not to be forced into killing again, Barnes used all his strength to try to break free from his restraints and stop Broussard. He managed to rip his arms free and punched the glass, trying to escape. Just as Barnes broke free, Broussard completed the code words, triggering his assassin mode and making him forget his loyalty to his friends. Broussard's first question was about the mission in 1991 when Barnes had killed Howard Stark and his wife, Maria Stark, to steal the super soldier serum. He demanded to know where the Hydra Siberian facility was located so he could release the other Winter Soldiers. Winter Soldier was then ordered by Broussard to fight and kill anyone who attempted to stop him, before escaping in a helicopter to seemingly prove his guilt for the recent terrorist attacks. Winter Soldier was soon found by Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson, who were trying to question Broussard, so Winter Soldier quickly fought and subdued the pair before heading back upstairs. Surrounded by Joint Counter-Terrorist Center agents, Winter Soldier fought his way through until Tony Stark attacked him, trying to use an Iron Man gauntlet to take him down. Even though he was hit by several shockwaves, Winter Soldier managed to withstand them and tried to shoot Stark in the head. However, Stark fought back, disarming Winter Soldier before getting knocked down himself with a punch to the chest. Before Winter Soldier could kill Stark, Sharon Carter and Natasha Romanoff arrived to help him and started fighting Winter Soldier together, using their skills to try to take him down. However, Winter Soldier's incredible strength allowed him to overpower them, slamming Carter against the table. He then tried to strangle Romanoff with his prosthetic arm, even though she was trying to talk him out of it. Winter Soldier was once more prevented from killing one of his allies when T'Challa rushed in and started fighting him, showing that even without his Panther habit, he was still a strong opponent. The two were evenly matched, briefly managing to overpower each other until T'Challa kicked Winter Soldier down a stairway, allowing him to escape toward the rooftop. Once Winter Soldier reached the helipad, he tore away the cables and got ready to escape from the building. However, before he could leave, Rogers found him and wouldn't let him go. Using all his strength, Rogers grabbed onto the helicopter and pulled it back down toward the helipad, watching as he successfully brought it down despite Winter Soldier's efforts to take off. Realizing that Rogers wouldn't let him go, Winter Soldier decided to crash the helicopter into him, trying to kill him with the blades. When Rogers survived, Winter Soldier grabbed him by the throat as they fell into the river below. During the crash, Barnes hit his head and lost consciousness. Rogers then saved his friend from drowning and took him to a warehouse while police helicopters kept searching for them. Later, Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson, not knowing if Barnes was still activated as the Winter Soldier or not, trapped his metal arm in a vise, leaving him defenseless and unable to continue fighting or running. When Barnes woke up, he recognized Rogers, prompting him to ask Barnes whether it was him or Winter Soldier speaking. Barnes replied that Rogers' mother's name was Sarah and that he had worn newspapers in his shoes, personal facts that only Barnes knew that were not in a museum. Rogers and Wilson talked about the situation and decided not to call Tony Stark. Wilson mentioned that he knew someone who could help them instead. Barnes also shared that he wasn't the only Winter Soldier and that Helmut Zemo, the man pretending to be Theo Broussard, was looking for the training facility in Siberia. Zemo's plan was likely to free the other Winter Soldiers from cryostasis and then send them out into the world to create chaos. Stealing a car, the three of them went to meet Sharon Carter, who had retrieved Captain America's shield and the EX-07 Falcon. While Steve Rogers talked with Carter, Barnes asked Sam Wilson if he could move his seat forward to have more space, but Wilson said no because he still didn't like Barnes due to their past fights. When Rogers and Carter shared a quick but heartfelt kiss before she left, both Barnes and Wilson smiled at their friend with pride, which made Rogers feel embarrassed. After getting their equipment back, the group met with Clint Barton, who had successfully rescued Wanda Maximoff from the Avengers compound and brought Scott Lang into their team. While Lang was excited to join the fight, Barnes listened and heard an announcement that the nearby airport was being evaluated because Iron Man was arriving. He translated this information for everyone else so they could understand. With time running out to find Helmut Zemo before he could reactivate the Winter Soldiers, Barnes and the other members of Captain America's team arrived at the airport to locate him. Barnes and Falcon took their positions inside the building while Rogers faced Iron Man and those who supported the Sokovia Accords. They advised Rogers to turn himself and Barnes over to Thaddeus Ross for questioning to prevent the situation from getting worse. When Rogers made his move, Barnes and Falcon rushed to their spot, only to be followed and confronted by Spider-Man. When Spider-Man attacked and kicked Falcon away, Barnes tried to hit him, but Spider-Man caught his prosthetic arm and remarked on how cool it was, leaving Barnes confused. A fight then started, with Falcon and Spider-Man chasing each other while Barnes threw things at Spider-Man, but Spider-Man threw them back at him. As the fight went on in the airport, Barnes saw that Falcon was nearly trapped by Spider-Man, who had used his web shooters to stick him to a wall. When Barnes tried to help his friend, they both got knocked off a platform and pinned to the floor with Spider-Man's webbing. When Spider-Man tried to make fun of them, Falcon secretly used Red Wing to throw him out of the building. Barnes then teased Falcon for not doing that earlier, but Falcon replied that he hated him. Rejoining his teammates, Barnes tried to run to the Quinjet to escape, but their way was blocked by Vision, who used the Mind Stone's power to stop them and told them to surrender before it was too late. As Barnes and Rogers' team faced Iron Man's team, it was clear that they would not change their views on the Sokovia Accords. With no other option, Rogers told his team to fight, and together, they charged at their opponents. Barnes quickly found himself engaged in a one-on-one fight with a bloodlusted Black Panther. As the battle raged on, Barnes managed to wrap his prosthetic arm around the throat of the Panther Habit. While locked together, Barnes tried to insist that he was not responsible for the death of Chaka, but Black Panther only questioned why he had run when confronted about it. Not believing Barnes' plea of innocence, Black Panther got the upper hand and kicked him across the runway. As Barnes lay on the ground, recovering from the hit, Black Panther tried to cut his throat with his claws. However, Wanda Maximoff stepped in and used her powers to stop Black Panther's hand just inches away from Barnes, preventing him from killing him. Then, she threw Black Panther across the runway. After regrouping with Captain America, Barnes listened as the group, including Hawkeye, decided that the only way to win was for many of them to lose against Iron Man's team while Rogers and Barnes made their escape. Knowing it would be very hard to reach the Quinjet without being stopped, Ant-Man offered to create a distraction by growing to his giant size and attacking War Machine while Barnes and Rogers ran to the Quinjet. While Giant Man created chaos, both Barnes and Rogers rushed to the Quinjet. They almost got stopped when Vision tried to knock down a tower to block their way, but Maximoff made sure it stayed up long enough for them to get underneath it. They then faced Black Widow, who thought about stopping them, but since she knew Rogers wouldn't back down, she used her taser discs to hold off Black Panther while they escaped in the Quinjet. While flying on the Quinjet after escaping from Iron Man's team, Barnes asked Rogers what might happen to the Avengers who supported him. Even though Rogers said he didn't know, he actually realized that Thaddeus Ross would send them to the raft. Barnes wondered if his life was worth all this pain, but Rogers insisted that everything he did as a Hydra assassin was not his fault. Upon arriving in Siberia at the facility there, Barnes armed himself before he and Captain America then discussed their time growing up together, with Rogers teasing Barnes over a time when he had tried to impress Dolores by spending their bus money to win her the stuffed bear. When Barnes noted how Dolores would be over 100 years old, Rogers then noted that they were, too. While they were exploring the facility, they heard a noise in the elevator and found that Iron Man had arrived. Barnes aimed his gun at Stark, worried that he was still an enemy. However, Stark revealed that he had recently learned about Barnes' innocence in Chaka's death and followed them to Siberia to propose a truce to capture Helmut Zemo. He eventually convinced Barnes to lower his weapon as they worked toward peace. After making peace for the moment, the group searched the facility for their target. They soon found that all the Winter Soldiers had been shot in their cryostasis chambers while still asleep, which ruined their idea that Zemo planned to unleash them on the world. They realized that Zemo had always been watching them and never intended to have more Winter Soldiers. While his allies confronted Zemo about why he killed innocent people to bring them there, Barnes kept his gun aimed at Zemo, ready to shoot if necessary. While Rogers confronted him directly, Zemo revealed that he was from Sokovia and had lost his whole family during the terrible final battle between the Avengers and Ultron. As Barnes watched in horror, Zemo revealed his plan by showing the security footage of Howard Stark's deadly car crash. This footage showed that Barnes was actually responsible for the deaths of Stark's parents because he had been sent to steal the super soldier serum from them. Iron Man, filled with rage after discovering who had actually killed his mother and father, attacked Barnes and ignored Rogers' explanation that Hydra had forced Barnes to kill them through brainwashing. This led to a fight between Barnes and Captain America against Iron Man. Even though Barnes tried to defend himself, Iron Man threw him across the facility and pinned him down, furiously trying to avenge his parents' murder at Barnes' hands. Even though Captain America tried to help him, Barnes remained pinned down as Iron Man pushed his former friend back and launched the Winter Soldier into the air. While he was airborne, Iron Man aimed a rocket right at Barnes' face, but Barnes managed to deflect it, causing much of the facility to collapse around them. As the fight went on, Zemo quietly slipped away, pleased that he had created such a huge divide between the heroes. After freeing himself from Iron Man's furious attack, Captain America ordered Barnes to quickly try to escape through the top of the silo while he held Iron Man back. As the Winter Soldier climbed the various platforms to get to safety, Iron Man chased him, despite his Mark XLVI armor being badly damaged. Just when Iron Man was about to catch him, Captain America helped Barnes get away. Even though he had temporarily held Iron Man back, Captain America knew that Iron Man wouldn't give up. He told the Winter Soldier to escape while he could, while he continued to fight Iron Man. However, despite Captain America's efforts, Iron Man managed to stop the Winter Soldier from getting away by firing a missile at the hatch, trapping the Winter Soldier inside the facility. Now trapped with someone who wanted to kill him, the Winter Soldier tried to defend himself with a steel beam, but Iron Man put him in a headlock. As Iron Man asked if he remembered killing his parents, Barnes insisted that he remembered every person he had been forced to kill while working for Hydra. Just then, Captain America stepped in to stop their angry fight. Seeing Captain America fighting hard to protect him while Iron Man wanted revenge for his mother's murder, Barnes grabbed Captain America's shield and joined the fight against Iron Man together. Winter Soldier and Captain America battled the furious Iron Man, who was determined to avenge his parents' deaths. Once Captain America was taken down, Winter Soldier continued to fight Iron Man by himself, filled with anger. The fight ended when Winter Soldier tried to pull out Stark's arc reactor, but this caused a strong blast of energy that destroyed Barnes' metal arm. Captain America then disabled Stark's arc reactor, which shut down Stark's armor. Now considered fugitives, the two escaped the facility, with Captain America leaving his shield behind since Stark's father was the one who made it and still technically owned it. Once outside the facility, Rogers and Barnes were confronted by Black Panther, who said he had overheard everything and had already caught Zemo. Before taking Zemo to Everett Ross, Black Panther told Barnes that he had connections in Wakanda that could help remove Hydra's programming. While Rogers went to rescue his teammates from the raft, Barnes stayed in the Quinjet because his injuries prevented him from helping. A few weeks after their escape from the raft, Barnes was given asylum in Wakanda, where they removed the remains of his mostly destroyed robotic arm. T'Challa then told Barnes and Steve Rogers that Barnes would need to go back into cryosleep to have a better chance of finally getting rid of his Winter Soldier programming. Although Rogers didn't agree, he let Barnes make the choice, and Barnes decided to give it a try. Once Shuri explained how she planned to remove the Hydra programming, Barnes willingly went back into cryogenic sleep until the Wakanda scientists could cure him of Hydra's brainwashing. As Barnes went under the ice, Rogers stood by his friend and offered support as they said goodbye to each other once again before Barnes was refrozen. During the months of her work, Shuri shared her idea with T'Challa about resetting Barnes to remove the trigger words as she tried to help him return to a normal life. By 2018, Barnes was released from his cryostasis chamber and found himself in the Wakandan forest with Ao to see if Shuri's deprogramming had permanently removed the Winter Soldier programming that had made him a ruthless killer. However, Barnes was doubtful that it would work, thinking it would never succeed. Ao promised that she would stop him from hurting anyone. She then said the trigger words that used to turn him into the Winter Soldier. Although Barnes felt stressed hearing them, he discovered that he was immune to the Hydra programming. This meant that Shuri's deprogramming had worked perfectly, and he was finally free from the trigger words that had made him a brainwashed assassin. Barnes was overjoyed and cried tears of happiness upon hearing this news. After the Hydra brainwashing was removed and he was freed from his cryostasis chamber, Barnes began to recover in a quiet Wakanda village. One morning, Barnes, now called the White Wolf, woke up to find 3 Wakanda children bothering him while he slept. Just then, Shuri came to assist with his rehabilitation. Barnes stepped out of his hut and watched the children leave. As Barnes gazed at a river, Shuri joined him and greeted him by calling him Sergeant Barnes. He replied that she should call him Bucky instead. Shuri then asked how he was feeling, and Barnes said he felt good and thanked her for all her help in healing him from what Hydra had done. Shuri invited Barnes to follow her, mentioning that he still had a lot to learn. Barnes took a moment to admire the calm Wakanda rivers. After Shuri helped fix his mind, Barnes continued to recover by working as a farmer in Wakanda. He wanted to regain some normalcy in his life and find inner peace, moving away from his past as an assassin for Hydra. However, his peaceful life was disrupted in 2018 when T'Challa and Okoye came to see him. T'Challa mentioned that the White Wolf had rested long enough and needed his help. Barnes greeted T'Challa and Okoye and noticed that T'Challa had brought him a new cybernetic arm to replace the one Tony Stark had destroyed in Siberia. Without wasting any time, Barnes asked where the fight was, knowing that T'Challa must have a reason to bring him a new arm. T'Challa explained that the fight was happening because Thanos was trying to collect all the Infinity Stones to wipe out half of all life in the universe. Barnes accepted the mission to protect Earth and attached his new arm. He joined T'Challa and the Dora Milaje to greet the other Avengers when they arrived in Wakanda to help protect Vision from Thanos' forces and keep the Mind Stone away from Thanos. While T'Challa explained what was happening, Barnes greeted everyone and reunited with his old friend, Steve Rogers, and they shared a hug. While the Avengers met with Shuri to find a way to remove the Mind Stone from Vision without harming him, Barnes and Falcon stood outside and saw Thanos' army coming. They watched as Thanos' dropships crashed into Wakanda's protective dome, causing it to explode on impact, making Barnes say that he loved Wakanda. However, he then noticed even more dropships landing outside the dome. As the Outrider dropships landed at Wakanda's border, Barnes joined the Wakanda forces to help defend, along with the other Avengers. He stood back with M'Baku's troops, watching as Steve Rogers went down to the shield barrier to talk with the Black Order before the battle started, accompanied by Natasha Romanoff and Black Panther. However, the negotiations quickly fell apart. As Rogers came back to the Wakanda forces, Barnes asked if Proxima Midnight and Cull Obsidian had agreed to surrender, but Rogers said they hadn't. Barnes then stood by and watched as Midnight opened their dropships, sending thousands of Outriders rushing toward the shield barrier. When they hit the barrier, many were torn apart, but Barnes realized they kept pushing through and wouldn't stop. Even though the mindless Outriders were killed by the barriers, they kept pushing through, sacrificing themselves until a few dozen made it past. Barnes and other Wakandan soldiers then fired at the Outriders to stop them. However, they soon noticed that these Outriders were running around the barrier to get to Shuri and Vision before they could remove the Mind Stone. This made Black Panther order that the barriers be opened slightly. Once Black Panther opened the barriers for direct combat, Barnes shot several Outriders until one knocked his gun away. He then used his knife to kill that Outrider. As Barnes began to feel overwhelmed by the army, he was saved when Thor arrived with Rocket and Groot through the Bifrost Bridge. Thor's arrival gave Barnes and the other warriors the boost they needed to push back the Outriders. As the battle went on, Barnes teamed up with Rocket, and they shot down the Outriders together. However, Barnes soon realized they were getting surrounded by enemies from all sides. To quickly take out the Outriders around them before they were completely overwhelmed, Barnes picked up Rocket and spun around in a circle while they both fired their weapons, taking down several Outriders just in time. After taking down the Outriders around them, Barnes let Rocket down. Rocket then asked how much Barnes would sell his gun for, to which Barnes replied that it wasn't for sale. Rocket also wanted to know about Barnes' prosthetic arm, but Barnes walked away without answering. Rocket muttered that he was going to get that arm. As the battle went on, Barnes kept fighting against the remaining Outriders. Barnes joined the others in the forest to protect Vision and then witnessed a wormhole open up. He watched as Thanos walk through and survey the area. As Thanos walked towards Vision, Barnes attempted to stop him by shooting his guns at Thanos, with Natasha Romanoff and Okoye joining him, only for Thanos to effortlessly blast Barnes away with the Power Stone, after all of Barnes' shots proved to be completely useless against him. When Barnes regained consciousness, he watched as Thanos united the Infinity Stones in the Infinity Gauntlet and snapped his fingers. Afterwards, Barnes sensed something was off and called out to Steve Rogers before disintegrating into dust. 5 years later, as a result of the blip, Barnes was restored to life and reappeared in Wakanda. Soon after, he, Sam Wilson, Wanda Maximoff, Groot and the Wakanda armies were recruited by the Masters of the Mystic Arts and brought via interdimensional portals to the ruins of the Avengers compound in New York. There, Barnes joined the other Avengers and assembled allies to face off against an alternate Thanos and his entire army. Following Captain America's leadership, Barnes had charged to the battle against Thanos' army of Sakarans and Chitauri. During the battle, Barnes reunited with Rocket as they shot down Thanos' soldiers side by side. When Thanos realized that he was losing the battle, he told Corvus Glaive to fire missiles down at the battlefield from the Sanctuary too. As the missiles started to hit, one explosion went off near Barnes, sending him flying. However, they were saved when Carol Danvers joined the fight and was able to destroy the Sanctuary too. As the battle went on, Barnes kept fighting against Thanos' whole army until Iron Man successfully took the 6 Infinity Stones and put them into his armor to prevent Thanos from getting them. Stark then defeated Thanos and his entire army but lost his own life in the process. After Stark died, Barnes and the other heroes knelt down as a way to honor the Avenger who sacrificed himself to save their universe. After being injured in the battle, Barnes bled on the battlefield, and Nick Fury's Secret Skrull team collected his blood and put it into a vial called the Harvest, along with other enhanced DNA samples. Later, Super Skrulls Gravik and Jaya used the Harvest vial to gain Barnes' super soldier powers and abilities. A week later, Barnes attended Tony Stark's funeral at Stark's home. He stood with Wanda Maximoff and Sam Wilson as they watched Pepper Potts and her daughter place Stark's last arc reactor into the lake to float away, with Wilson placing a comforting hand on Barnes' shoulder. Rogers then shared with Barnes that he planned to live the rest of his life in the past after finishing his final mission, and he would return to the present as an old man to give a new version of his shield to Wilson. The next day, Barnes was with Wilson and Bruce Banner in the forest outside the Avengers compound, which was being cleaned up. Steve Rogers was getting ready to go on a mission to return the 6 Infinity Stones and Mjolnir to their right places in time to erase the branched timelines. As Rogers prepared, Barnes said a heartfelt goodbye to his best friend, remembering their last conversation before Barnes went to serve in World War II, and then they hugged each other. Barnes then watched as Rogers put on his advanced tech suit and gathered all the items to be returned before Banner sent him through the quantum tunnel to complete the mission. However, when Rogers didn't come back after the planned 5 seconds, Barnes stayed calm and turned to see an old man sitting alone on a bench by a lake. Barnes quickly realized that this man was an elderly Steve Rogers. Understanding what was really happening, Barnes called Wilson over and signaled him to come to Rogers. He knew about Rogers' plan to travel to an alternate timeline to be with Peggy Carter in the past so he could live a long and peaceful life with the woman he loved, leaving behind his life as a superhero. Barnes watched proudly as Rogers handed his shield to Wilson, officially making him the new Captain America, a choice that Barnes quietly accepted as the right one. After returning to the United States, Barnes was offered a pardon by the government for his actions as the Winter Soldier, on the condition that he attend court-mandated therapy sessions to address his post-traumatic stress disorder. Wanting to make amends for his past, Barnes created a list of names and a notebook of people he hoped to make peace with, including Yori Nakajima, the father of R.J. Nakajima, one of his victims, whom he had befriended. Although Sam Wilson sent him text messages, Barnes chose to ignore them. Barnes tracked down Elle Atwood, a former Hydra operative, and found out she was still abusing her power as a member of Congress. He went to the parking garage where her car was and attached a device to hack into it. Later, when Atwood and her partner got into the car and planned to kill her political rival, Lockhart, Barnes activated the device. He locked the car doors and drove it around the garage, frightening Atwood. After stopping the car, Barnes approached and spoke to Atwood through the open window, asking if she remembered him. When her accomplice tried to shoot him, Barnes quickly disarmed him and knocked him out with his vibranium arm. He told Atwood that he was no longer the Winter Soldier and that she was part of his mission to make amends. Smiling, Barnes walked away as federal authorities arrived and arrested Atwood. He then crossed her name off his list. After Senator Atwood was captured, Barnes went home but had a nightmare about the massacre at the Hotel Inessa, where he had killed an innocent man named R.J. Nakajima. He woke up sweating. The next morning, Barnes went to a therapy session with Christina Rayner. He told her, once again, that he didn't have a nightmare, but she didn't believe him. Barnes mentioned that he had crossed Atwood's name off his list and assured her that he followed all 3 rules he was supposed to stick to. As their conversation went on, Barnes reflected on how he had been involved in conflict for almost a century, with only a brief peaceful time while living in Wakanda. He expressed his desire for a calm life, which Rayner scoffed at. She checked his phone and pointed out that he had been ignoring Sam Wilson's texts, advising him to connect with people, reminding him that isolation is its own kind of torment. She added that with his mind free from brainwashing and his pardon in place, he was now truly free, though Barnes wondered what he was actually free to do now. After his therapy session, Barnes encountered Yori Nakajima outside their apartment, where Yori was arguing with a neighbor named Unique over trash being put in Yori's bin. Barnes stepped in to resolve the issue and then took Yori to their usual spot, Izzy's, for lunch. During their meal, Yori boldly asked the waitress, Leah, if she would go on a date with Barnes, leaving him embarrassed. As they ate, Yori mentioned his late son and how he never learned the truth about his death. Barnes grew silent, painfully aware that he was the one who killed Yori's son while under Hydra's brainwashing. Barnes visited the restaurant and brought Leah flowers in a polite, gentlemanly manner. They played a game of Battleship and shared some beer. However, when Leah brought up Yori Nakajima's late son, Barnes felt overwhelmed and excused himself. Feeling guilty for killing Yori's son while brainwashed as the Winter Soldier, Barnes went to Yori's apartment, left the money for their lunch, and quietly departed. In his apartment, Barnes watched the news and was shocked and outraged to learn that John Walker had been named the new Captain America. As Walker was introduced to the world and interviewed, Barnes grew increasingly angry, especially when Walker claimed he felt like Captain America was a brother to him. Angry with Sam Wilson for giving up the shield and allowing John Walker to become the new Captain America, Barnes went to a United States Air Force base and confronted Wilson at the terminal. He demanded to know why Wilson abandoned the shield, insisting it was the wrong decision. Frustrated when Wilson explained he hadn't expected this outcome, Barnes continued to criticize him, saying Wilson had no right to give up the shield and it wasn't what Rogers wanted. Wilson, equally heated, shot back that Barnes also had no right to talk about what he should or shouldn't do. Barnes and Wilson stopped walking as Wilson explained that he had more pressing matters to deal with. He then revealed that he was heading out to confront the terrorist group known as the Flag Smashers and briefed Barnes about them. Wilson jokingly mentioned that he thought the Flag Smashers might be part of the big three threats: aliens, androids, and wizards. They briefly discussed whether Doctor Strange was a wizard before Wilson headed toward the aircraft. Deciding he should go along, Barnes joined Wilson and Joaquin Torres on the plane. While on the plane to Germany, Barnes grew frustrated with Falcon for not having an attack plan, noting that Steve Rogers would have definitely come up with one. Once they arrived in Munich, Barnes watched as Falcon jumped out of the plane. Shortly after, Barnes followed, surprising Joaquin Torres by leaping out without any flying gear. He tried to grab onto tree branches with his vibranium arm while falling, but still landed hard on the ground. He and Falcon met up at an abandoned factory and Falcon used Redwing to tease Barnes, who was not amused. There they spotted the Flag Smashers loading up heavy boxes. After Falcon informed them that someone was inside the first truck whom he believed was a hostage, Barnes rushed off to the rescue. On the highway, Barnes hopped onto one of the trucks and found boxes of vaccines and medicine. He then spotted what he and Falcon believed to be a hostage, but it was the leader of the Flag Smashers, Carly Morgenthau, who with superhuman force kicked Barnes out of the truck. Barnes was held down by Matthias and Gigi on top of the truck until Falcon came in to fight them off. After fighting back, Barnes freed himself. They were then helped by John Walker and Lamar Hoskins, who arrived in a helicopter to join the fight against the Flag Smashers. During the battle, Barnes fell off the top of the truck and grabbed onto the side, while Davich tried to kick him off. Due to Barnes' vibranium arm, Davich was unable to force his arm away. Shortly, Falcon swooped underneath the truck and grabbed Barnes, with the two rolling in the grass and Barnes landing on top of Falcon. Barnes then told Falcon that they were super soldiers, before Falcon told him to get off of him. Barnes and Sam Wilson had then returned to the highway and started walking towards the nearest airport, which was 20 miles away. However, along the way they were found by John Walker and Lamar Hoskins, who passed them in their vehicle and then invited them to ride with them, but they refused initially. After being asked again, Barnes and Wilson agreed to join Walker and Hoskins in their vehicle. But when Hoskins said he was called Battlestar and Walker referred to Wilson and Barnes as Captain America's sidekicks, Barnes told the driver to stop the vehicle. He and Wilson then got out and left. While on the plane back to the United States of America, Barnes suggested stealing the shield from John Walker again. However, Sam Wilson reminded him of what happened the last time, that Sharon Carter became an enemy of the state and he and Steve Rogers were in hiding for 2 years. Back in the United States, Barnes took Wilson to Baltimore, Maryland to the house of Isaiah Bradley, a black super soldier who he had met in 1951 in the Korean War. His grandson, Eli Bradley, answered the door and told them his grandfather would not be seeing them, but Barnes told him to tell Bradley something only he would know. After the two were let in, Barnes told Bradley that he thought there were more super soldiers out there and asked for his help, only for Bradley to become angry, as he made it clear that he was not interested in helping them and angrily told them to leave. After the two left, Wilson asked Barnes why he had kept Bradley a secret and Barnes told him that no one had known about him. They were interrupted when Baltimore policemen arrived and stated that Barnes was under arrest for missing his mandated therapy. Barnes was taken to the police station, but was soon released. He was then taken to the main lobby where Christina Rayner, his therapist, was waiting on him, as well as Sam Wilson. Rayner then instructed Barnes and Wilson to have a therapy session there at the station. Barnes and Wilson were then asked to have open dialogue, and Barnes told Wilson how he felt with him giving up the shield. After Wilson realized the therapy session was not for him, he left, and Barnes followed shortly after, before asking Rayner what the second rule was they discussed. Outside the station, he and Wilson found John Walker and Lamar Hoskins waiting on them, but both turned down Walker's invitation to ally, noting they were free agents. While walking down the street, Barnes told Wilson that he felt they needed to go and see Helmut Zemo to find out more about the Flag Smashers, which Wilson was highly reluctant about. Barnes and Sam Wilson went to see Helmut Zemo, who was in an isolated cell in the Berlin Correctional Facility. Barnes told Wilson that he had to see Zemo alone, citing his hatred of the Avengers. Wilson pointed out to Barnes that Zemo did not particularly have an amicable relationship with Barnes either. Barnes walked into the cell and saw Zemo on the other side of a glass wall. Zemo was surprised to see him and recited the words that triggered the Winter Soldier programming, but Barnes replied that they no longer worked on him. Zemo admitted he knew that and was just teasing him. Moving closer to the glass, Zemo looked into Barnes' eyes and claimed he could still see the Winter Soldier inside him. Changing the topic, Zemo pointed out that Barnes had the advantage of being kept in a cryostasis chamber while he was in prison, but Barnes insisted it had not been a nice experience. Zemo then apologized to Barnes, saying that his actions in framing him for Chaka's murder were not personal and that Barnes was just a means to an end. Barnes changed the topic and told Zemo that someone had recreated the super soldier serum, which caught Zemo's interest, making him think Barnes was desperate for his help. Barnes then asked Zemo what book he was reading and received it when Zemo slipped it under the glass. Barnes put a key card inside the book and returned it to Zemo before leaving the cell, effectively giving Zemo a way to escape the prison. Barnes and Wilson left the facility and Barnes took him to a garage nearby. After Wilson questioned what happened in the cell, Barnes told him in an indirect way that he had started a prison riot to allow for Zemo's escape. When Wilson figured that out and saw Zemo walking into the room, he got upset with Barnes for having freed Zemo without talking to him first. Wilson demanded that Zemo be returned to prison, but Barnes argued that they needed him. While they were talking, Zemo tried to intervene, but was immediately silenced by them. Barnes and Wilson took Zemo to his garage so he could collect his things. After Zemo got his belongings, he led Barnes and Wilson to an airfield. Zemo took them to his private plane, and they flew away. On the plane, Zemo explained that they didn't understand what life was like in prison, but Wilson might have an idea since he had been on the raft before. Zemo became curious while looking at Barnes' notebook and asked who Nakajima was. In response, Barnes jumped out of his seat and grabbed Zemo by the throat, promising to kill him if he ever touched the notebook again. Zemo apologized, saying he understood that it was a list of people Barnes had hurt as the Winter Soldier. Barnes then warned Zemo not to test his luck again. Zemo then told them they were going to Madripoor. Wilson asked what that place was, and Barnes explained that it was an island in Indonesia. Zemo added that it was a lawless place. However, Zemo said they couldn't just walk into Madripoor as themselves, because being Avengers would attract too much attention. He informed Barnes that he would need to become the Winter Soldier again, which Barnes agreed to, though he did so reluctantly. Once they arrived on the outskirts of Madripoor, Helmut Zemo told Barnes and Sam Wilson that they needed to remain in character upon entering the city. Once they had arrived inside Madripoor's center, Barnes and Wilson were led by Zemo through the streets, passing armed guards and secret dealings along the way, as he took them past the Princess Bar and instead took them to the Brass Monkey Saloon. Barnes stood with Zemo and Wilson inside the saloon, where many of the customers noticed him. When the power broker's henchman touched Zemo, Zemo signaled Barnes to act like the Winter Soldier. Barnes then unleashed his strength on the men and easily fought them off. While he was choking one man with his vibranium arm, Zemo stopped him, saying they needed to stay in character. The bartender then warned them that they could be seen by Selby. Zemo explained that he wanted Selby to tell them everything they knew about the super soldier serum, and in exchange, he would give her the Winter Soldier as Zemo walked over to Barnes, who did not react, promising that he would give Selby the code words that would allow her to control him. Zemo had continued to mock Barnes by caressing his face while promising that he would do anything that Selby required of him, with Selby noting that this was more like the Zemo she remembered, noting that she was glad she did not immediately have him killed. Selby told them that the super soldier serum was on Madripoor and that it was being developed by Wilfred Nagel, who had been hired by the power broker to work on it, but things had not gone as planned. However, when Wilson's phone rang and his cover was revealed, Selby ordered their deaths, but she was shot by a sniper instead. After Selby's death, a bounty was quickly placed on Barnes, Wilson, and Zemo. Zemo urged them to leave, and the three of them ran out of the city as bounty hunters started appearing everywhere. The three were saved from the bounty hunters when Sharon Carter emerged from the shadows and took off her hoodie. Barnes and Wilson told her not to shoot Zemo, even though she wanted to, because it was his fault she had to go into hiding. When they asked why she was there, Carter reminded them that she had gone into hiding after stealing Captain America's shield and the EX-07 Falcon. She then agreed to help them and took them to her apartment. At Carter's apartment, Barnes relaxed on the couch while Wilson changed clothes and Zemo got a drink. Carter then asked how John Walker was and noted that Barnes had always believed in a patriotic worldview, teasing him about being Captain America's best friend in World War II and how he was Mr. America. Barnes listened on as Wilson explained how the Flag Smashers had stolen the super soldier serum, noting that Wilfred Nagel was their lead, who worked for the power broker. Although she warned them to stay out of this, Carter had eventually agreed to help them if Wilson helped to clear her name. With Carter agreeing to help, she explained that she would be hosting a party with some important people and advised them to stay out of trouble. At Carter's party, which was held in a nightclub, Barnes kept a watchful eye on Zemo. Eventually, Carter returned to Barnes, Wilson, and Zemo, telling them that she had found Nagel, and they all left together. The next day, Barnes followed Sharon Carter to the Buccaneer Base shipyard on the edge of Madripoor. Carter reminded them that there was still a bounty on their heads. She took them to a container where Wilfred Nagel was supposed to be and gave each of them an earpiece to keep in touch while she stayed outside to watch. Helmet Zemo guided Barnes and Sam Wilson into Nagel's lab. When they entered, Barnes and Wilson aimed their guns and found Nagel working on the super soldier serum. They turned off his music, surprising him. Although Nagel tried to force them out, he stopped once he saw Barnes, recognizing him as Winter Soldier, while Nagel introduced Zemo, noting that Nagel would have heard of Zemo. While Nagel attempted to suggest they make a deal, Carter warned Barnes and the others on the radios that bounty hunters were arriving at the shipyard. Barnes listened as Nagel explained that Hydra had brought him into their Winter Soldier program, continuing their work after they couldn't control the Winter Soldiers. Nagel mentioned that he had come to Madripoor after the Blip, where the power broker funded his work. He noted that he had created 20 vials of the serum, but Carly Morgenthau had stolen them. Just then, Carter rushed into the lab, warning that they were running out of time. Zemo then shot Nagel in the chest, killing him, before Wilson and Carter took the gun away from him. Within seconds, a bounty hunter shot the laboratory, causing it to explode, and Barnes, Wilson, and Carter dropped to the ground to avoid the blast. When they got back up, they realized that Zemo had escaped. The three quickly found themselves trapped, but soon spotted Zemo on top of a container, shooting at the hunters and causing another explosion. Once they were able to escape from the bounty hunters, they ran through the shipyard. As they ran, Barnes threw a pole into one of the hunters' shoulders. After running throughout the shipyard, Barnes, Wilson, and Carter were shortly met by Zemo, who had stolen a getaway car. When Barnes got in the car, he got in the front seat and told Wilson he wouldn't give it up, who was forced to sit in the back. This was reminiscent of when he didn't give up his front seat for Barnes in 2016. So Wilson sat in the back as Zemo drove off away to his private plane. While on the plane, Barnes was told by Sam Wilson of a lead in Riga, Latvia about a woman named Danya Madani who had just died at a Global Repatriation Council camp. After Wilson said that he wishes he had destroyed the shield, Barnes said he would take it if that was the case. When they arrived in Riga, Barnes saw some Kimoyo beads on the street and told Wilson and Zemo that he would catch up with them soon. He followed the beads down the street and soon met Ao. She asked him where Zemo was and why he had let him escape from prison. Barnes, who had learned Kosa, told the disappointed Ao that Zemo was just a way to reach their goal. Ao then warned him that he had 8 hours left with Zemo. After she left, Barnes went back to the building where they were staying. Back in the room, Barnes talked with Sam Wilson and Helmut Zemo, and they decided to look for Danya Madani's funeral by checking out the Global Repatriation Council's refugee camp. Once at the camp, Barnes and Wilson split up and discovered that the refugees there were supporters of the Flag Smashers. After failing to find out where the funeral was, Barnes and Wilson met up in the courtyard, where they saw Zemo talking to some refugee children. They became suspicious when Zemo got a girl to whisper something in his ear. Getting himself a drink, Barnes walked over and sat on the couch opposite Sam Wilson. However, when Helmut Zemo mentioned leverage over them, Barnes walked over and threw his drink out the window. He then threatened Zemo not to speak of leverage until Wilson walked up and told Barnes to control his temper. They followed Zemo through the streets until they ran into Captain America and Battlestar, who decided to join them to the funeral location. Once they reached the building, Walker handcuffed Zemo to the wall while Wilson went inside the funeral to talk to Carly Morgenthau. Barnes stayed outside the room, standing in the doorway. However, Captain America, getting impatient, tested Barnes' patience and mocked him for having the serum. He then warned Barnes that if anything happened to Wilson, it would be his fault. Eventually, Captain America burst into the room and threatened to arrest Morgenthau, causing her to run away. Barnes chased after her and jumped down to the next floor, but he lost sight of Morgenthau. He and Wilson regrouped and continued searching the building. With Battlestar, they eventually found Captain America standing next to an unconscious Zemo. Once they had returned to their building in which they were staying, Barnes got a drink while Sam Wilson talked to Helmut Zemo, who was recovering from getting knocked out. Barnes then realized the 8 hours were up when Ao and 2 other Dora Milaje named Yama and Nambul arrived to arrest Zemo. Barnes and Wilson watched as Captain America challenged Ao and then started fighting her and the others, with Battlestar joining in. Barnes mocked Captain America as he struggled to fight against the Dora Milaje. Soon Wilson asked Barnes if they should intervene, so Barnes tried to stop Ao, telling her they should talk over it, but she detached his vibranium arm instead, disappointed with him for having freed Zemo. Once Ao realized Zemo escaped, she and the other Dora Milaje left, while Barnes reattached his arm while still in shock that Ao had removed it. Afterwards, he and Wilson left the room shortly, leaving Captain America and Battlestar behind. Back on the street, Barnes walked with Sam Wilson when Wilson received a phone call. He learned that Carly Morgenthau wanted to meet him alone. Barnes said he was going to and accompanied Wilson to an abandoned building, where they found Morgenthau. Morgenthau noticed that Falcon wasn't alone and looked at Barnes, telling Falcon that she didn't want to kill him but instead wanted to ask if he would join her. When Falcon got a notification from Sharon Carter about Captain America, Falcon told Barnes they had to move. Barnes leaped off the balcony only to get slammed into by Morgenthau, who leaped the same time. As Falcon flew off, Barnes got back up and chased after Morgenthau as they ran towards the location. Once at the location, Barnes saved Falcon from Diego, jokingly telling him he was welcome, before engaging with another Flag Smasher using his knife mastery. After Battlestar was killed by Morgenthau and Captain America sped after the Flag Smashers, Barnes and Wilson left the building. Outside, Barnes and Wilson watched in the public square as Captain America murdered Nico with the shield, while onlookers watched in horror at the sight. After the incident with Captain America, Barnes and Falcon chased him to an abandoned warehouse to confront him. Understanding Captain America's urge to kill the Flag Smashers and his pain over Battlestar's death, Barnes tried to reason with him, despite their earlier argument. He warned that the path Captain America was on wouldn't end well. However, Captain America strongly rejected Barnes' advice, saying he was not like him and would not give up the shield. Realizing there was no other option, Barnes sadly replied that they would fight when Captain America asked if they were going to fight him for the shield. Barnes and Falcon then engaged in a fierce fight with Captain America. Barnes performed better than Wilson and managed to disarm Captain America of his pistol, but they were still overpowered by Captain America's mix of shield skills and martial arts. Eventually, Captain America threw the shield at Barnes, sending him flying backward. Barnes caught the shield, but Walker aggressively took it back, throwing Barnes into an electric circuit, which caused him to fall to the ground and be briefly knocked out. Barnes regained consciousness in time to save Falcon, as Captain America was about to kill him with the shield, and tackled Captain America, freeing Falcon. Barnes then delivered several blows on Captain America and upon being knocked down managed to stop him from using the shield to kill him, and then proceeded to help Falcon yank the shield out of his hand, breaking Captain America's arm in the process. Captain America tried to take the shield again from Falcon, but with Captain America now disarmed, Barnes easily defeated him, punching him in the face before proceeding to lift him off the ground by the shoulder and allow Falcon to deal the finishing blow with the shield, knocking them all to the ground and Walker out for good. Barnes then got back up and grabbed the shield, dropping it next to Falcon, and then gave him a look of disappointment before leaving the warehouse. Following their fight with Captain America, Barnes and Wilson went back to the Global Repatriation Council resettlement camp and met with Joaquin Torres there. Upon arriving, Torres greeted Barnes and commented on how Barnes seemed to have gotten his sleeve back after having ripped it off back to jump out of the plane in Munich. Leaving Wilson and Torres, Barnes traveled to find Helmut Zemo. Barnes went to Sokovia to the Sokovian Memorial where he found Helmut Zemo. Zemo commented that he had decided not to kill Barnes, and Barnes replied sarcastically that he was relieved. Zemo told Barnes that he needed to kill Carly Morgenthau as he was programmed to kill once, and that Sam Wilson was too stubborn like Steve Rogers to do so. However, Barnes told him that he and Wilson had other plans on how to handle Morgenthau. Barnes then took out his handgun and pointed it at Zemo's face, with Zemo embracing it, knowing his fate. Barnes then smiled and dropped the blank bullets out of his hand, showing Zemo that he wasn't a killer anymore and how he was a free man. The Dora Milaje led by Ao arrived then and arrested Zemo. Zemo wished Barnes well and told him he had crossed his name off in his book before being led away. Ao told Barnes that Zemo would be going to the raft and told Barnes to lay low from Wakanda for some time due to his involvement with Zemo's escape. She also called him White Wolf, signaling she wasn't disappointed with him anymore. She then left, but Barnes stopped her and asked for a favor from them for Wilson. After receiving a box from the Wakandans, Barnes returned to the United States of America and went to Delacroix, Louisiana to be with Sam Wilson. He arrived, bringing the box with him, and helped lift a heavy box off of the Wilson's family boat, surprising Wilson, who was pleased to see him. Barnes then gave Wilson the box. He also helped Wilson out but used his right arm instead, with Wilson questioning why he didn't use his vibranium arm. Shortly, Barnes was introduced to Wilson's sister Sarah, who was happy to meet him. Later in the day, Barnes told Wilson that he would stay at a nearby hotel, but Wilson told him to stay with him at Sarah's house instead. For the next few days, as Barnes stayed with Wilson, he opted to sleep on the couch at Sarah's house, where he met Wilson's nephews Cass Wilson and A.J. Wilson. Working with Wilson on the boat, Barnes occasionally would watch Wilson struggle with manually removing objects, and then use his vibranium arm to lift it easily. Each time Barnes saw Sarah, he would say hello to her and give her a big smile, leading Wilson to jokingly tell him not to flirt with her. After fixing the boat, Barnes and Wilson practiced training with the shield. Barnes had no problem throwing and catching the shield, but Wilson had to work harder at it. As they were practicing, Barnes apologized to Wilson for criticizing him after he gave the shield to the government and told him that the shield was of sentimental value to him. He then told Wilson that when he and Steve Rogers talked the night before Rogers handed Wilson the shield, they had no idea what it would have been like for a black man to have the shield. Wilson understood and helped Barnes come to peace with his time brainwashed as the Winter Soldier and told him to not just help himself, but the victims of the Winter Soldier's actions. Barnes agreed and expressed his gratitude for Wilson's pep talk, knowing that Wilson used to be a counselor. They then did a handshake hug and commented on how they weren't technically friends, but more like co-workers, but then realized they were actually friends. Barnes then told Wilson to call him once he heard from the Flag Smashers, patted him on the shoulder, and left for New York City. 2 months later, Barnes learned that the Flag Smashers were planning to attack the GRC on the night that they were voting on the Patch Act. Barnes returned to New York City, suited up, and walked over to the GRC New York headquarters. As he was walking over, he passed an NYPD officer who greeted him and recognized him as Sergeant Barnes. Before he could get to the building, Barnes was stopped by a man, which was revealed to be Sharon Carter wearing a photostatic veil. Surprised, Barnes asked Carter what she was doing there without being pardoned and if she was worried, but Carter responded saying that no one would notice her there. In communications with Captain America, Barnes hooks Carter up to join their line and the two go inside the GRC building. However, Carter is unable to continue as she sets off security check and tells Barnes that she will go rescue the GRC hostages from the parking garage. Barnes goes up to the second level and is promptly handed a phone by a woman who told him the caller is for him. He answered the phone and found the caller to be Carly Morgenthau. Barnes told Morgenthau that she will regret her actions as it will always haunt her if she doesn't back down, until realizing that Morgenthau had distracted him by the call. Frustrated for having fallen for the trap, Barnes ran out to the parking garage and hopped onto a motorcycle. Riding the motorcycle out of the garage and onto the street, Barnes was asked by Wilson to help with a helicopter rescue, only for Barnes to say that that was in Wilson's category since he was the only one who could fly. After locating the armored trucks carrying the GRC hostages in a construction site, Barnes rammed his motorcycle into the barrier, flipping him over to the position to tackle Davidge. As Barnes easily overpowered Davidge, Morgenthau told her teammates to set one of the trucks on fire so Barnes could rescue the hostages, allowing for her to escape. Upon seeing the truck on fire, Barnes knocked down Davidge and went to save the hostages. Seeing that the truck was locked shut by a device, Barnes used his vibranium arm to pull it off and then opened the doors. He then helped the hostages off the truck and away from the fire, with one hostage thanking Barnes for rescuing them. Returning to fight the Flag Smashers, Barnes saw John Walker trying to fight them and came to his help. Barnes punched Davidge into construction equipment and fought Morgenthau, who tore a parking meter out of the ground and swung it at him. Dodging her blows, Barnes grabbed a heavy chain and swung it at her, knocking her down, only for Davidge to kick him away. Barnes landed on the riverbank below as Davidge landed down to engage him. Forced into combat with Davidge and unable to help any longer, Barnes was able to defeat Davidge once again even when he was using a metal bar. Barnes then watched as one of the trucks drove off the ledge barely and as Walker's shield was flung over to the riverbank. He then saw the Flag Smashers grab Walker and cause them all to fall down to the riverbank also. Barnes then helped Walker up and watched as Captain America, in his new uniform, pushed the truck back to the ground, saving the hostages. Barnes smiled upon seeing this. Upon seeing the hostages were saved, Morgenthau then threw a pole at Barnes, but he caught it easily. Captain America then arrived, hitting the Flag Smashers back with the shield. Barnes then watched as George Badrock filled the air with smoke, allowing the Flag Smashers to escape. Barnes, Captain America, and Walker teamed up and chased after them into the underground tunnels. After Captain America suggested they split up, Barnes went with Walker, realizing that Walker may need his help. Barnes used the phone given to him earlier to send a message to the last 3 Flag Smashers through their app to meet them at a location. Then he and Walker waited until Dee, Gigi, and Davidge arrived, looking confused. The New York City Police Department units then swarmed them and took the 3 into custody, while Barnes and Walker walked away, with Walker giving Barnes a friendly pat. Barnes and Walker walked back to the street and witnessed Captain America's speech to the rescued GRC members and news reporters. Barnes said goodbye to Walker and waited for Captain America to come over to him. Barnes then told him that he only heard a little bit of the speech, teasingly, before calling him Cap in improvement and patting the shield. Barnes and Captain America then met with Sharon Carter, who was injured and leaning against a parked car. Barnes and Captain America both told her she needed to get medical treatment, but Carter refused. When Captain America departed, Barnes went with Carter and helped her leave the area. Afterwards, Barnes went to Yuri Nakajima's apartment and surprised Nakajima, who said that it wasn't a Wednesday and commented on how late it was. Nakajima then invited Barnes inside, and Barnes told him that he needed to tell him something. They sat down and Barnes told Nakajima that he, as the Winter Soldier, had killed Nakajima's son. Nakajima then asked why Barnes did, and Barnes told him that he had had no choice in the matter. He then left a shocked and confused Nakajima and returned to his apartment. The next day, Barnes dropped his completed notebook in a bag at Christina Rayner's office along with a note thanking her for helping him. He then walked outside Izzy and looked inside the window, seeing Nakajima at the bar talking with Leah. After making eye contact with Leah, Barnes left New York City. Barnes then returned to Delacroix, Louisiana, and attended the community's cookout, bringing a cake for dessert. Upon arriving, he was greeted enthusiastically by AJ and Cass, who called him Uncle Bucky. He then hugged Sam Wilson and greeted Sarah before joining them to eat and have fellowship. Feeling relaxed and comfortable in doing so, Barnes showed his vibranium arm to AJ, Cass, and other children, while Sarah watched and laughed. After the cookout, Barnes and Wilson watched as the sun went down on the water and both smiled, since both were feeling good about themselves. Barnes, opting to stay there with Wilson, then walked back with Wilson to talk with the community. In December 2025, Barnes was attacked by Nebula of the Guardians of the Galaxy, who had come to Earth specifically to steal his vibranium arm so that she could gift it to Rocket as a Christmas present. Nebula succeeded in removing his arm, after which she returned to space.